Vladimir Putin's Easter truce has ended without real progress towards the end of the war in Ukraine. Putin did not extend his one-day ceasefire in Ukraine and the war went on. However, US President Donald Trump said that the war in Ukraine could end this week without providing any details. Trump's administration put pressure on Ukraine to recognize Crimea as a Russian territory. So what is the real reason behind Putin's self-declared one-day ceasefire in Ukraine? How does Trump's team put pressure on Ukraine to make concessions to Russia? Russian dictator Vladimir Putin announced an Easter truce in Ukraine until midnight Sunday night. In Moscow, he said that he was acting out of humanitarian consideration. However, several hours before the truce expired, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Putin had not given an order to extend it. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky proposed Putin to agree with a 30-day full ceasefire in the air. However, Putin did not prolong his ceasefire and the war in Ukraine went on. Sky News military analyst Sean Bell says there are three main reasons for Putin's ceasefire. Putin is demonstrating domestically as a sort of peacemaker and showing empathy with his people, according to Sean Bell. The second reason is that Putin wants to buy time to relocate 50,000 Russian troops currently situated in the Kursk region. Russia will move 50,000 troops that it had positioned there before to the Donbas region. The third reason, Sean Bell suggests, for Putin's ceasefire is that Trump could abandon ceasefire talks and plans to reintegrate Moscow into the global community. US President Trump recently said that he might take a pass from peace talks if either side make it difficult. Sean Bell is confident that Putin will be slightly worried if Trump disengages because he's unpredictable and might suddenly support Ukraine again. Meanwhile, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin was not fair even in his self-declared ceasefire. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russian troops had violated ceasefire 3,000 times since the start of Sunday. The president said the heaviest shelling and assaults were in eastern Ukraine near the city of Pokrovsk, a key logistic hub in the Donetsk region. Earlier that day, he said that there were no air raid alerts, referring to Russia's daily drone and missile strikes against Ukraine. He proposed to cease any strikes using long-range drones and missiles on civilian infrastructure for 30 days, with the possibility of extension. Zelensky also said Putin's declaration of a truce amounted to a PR exercise and his words were empty as he did not agree to a full ceasefire. He also accused Kremlin to create a general impression of a ceasefire. Quote, "This Easter has clearly demonstrated that the only source of this war and the reason it drags on is Russia." Also, US Republican Congressman John Wilson has responded to the announcement of a so-called Easter truce by Russian dictator Putin. Wilson emphasized that Russia could end the war against Ukraine at any moment if it truly intended to do so. Quote, "War criminal Putin reminds us of his complete and utter depravity and disregard for human life by bombing children's playgrounds, Christian bakeries and declaring a fake Easter truce while continuing the invasion of Ukraine." Wilson added that history will remember Putin as a weak and pathetic man. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump said that Russia and Ukraine could make a deal this week without giving any further details. Russia and Ukraine will be able to do big business with the United States if they secure a peace deal this week, US President Donald Trump wrote in social media. Quote, "Hopefully Russia and Ukraine will make a deal this week. Both will then start to do big business with the United States of America, which is thriving, and make a fortune." As we know earlier, Trump suggested that he could abandon ceasefire talks if there was no real progress. The Wall Street Journal at the same time reported that the United States is waiting for Kyiv's response, in particular regarding the recognition of Crimea as a Russian territory and Ukraine's refusal to join NATO. The United States is considering the idea of a neutral territory around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Ukraine is under pressure this week to respond to a series of far-reaching ideas from Trump's administration to end the war, including potential U.S. recognition of Russia's occupations of Crimea and Ukraine's refusal to join NATO. These ideas were set out in a confidential document presented by officials of the Trump's administration to the Ukrainian colleagues in Paris last week. They were also shared with senior European officials at a daytime meeting. The US is now waiting for Ukraine's response, which is expected to come at the meeting of US, Ukrainian and European officials in London this week. Then, if there is a convergence between American and European positions, proposal can be sent to Moscow. According to Wall Street Journal, to put pressure on Ukraine and Russia, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said on Friday that the administration may suspend its negotiating efforts if progress is not made on key issues in the next few weeks. Wall Street Journal reports US diplomatic pressure is aimed at preparing the ground for a ceasefire along the current lines of hostilities and settlement of the war. Senior US State Department official called the ideas presented to Ukrainians options for Kyiv to consider, not accept or reject. The official said that the list of potential options was provided for discussions and feedback. The publication notes that the United States' recognition of Russia's seizure of Crimea Peninsula in 2014 would reverse more than a decade of American policy under both Democratic and Republican administrations. As we know, the US Congress even passed a law opposing US recognition of Russia's occupation of Crimea. Another US idea, according to Western officials, involves designating the area around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant as a neutral territory that could be under American control. Wall Street Journal suggests that the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant would likely supply electricity to both Ukrainian territory and the occupied regions that Russia seized after the 2024 invasion and still holds under its control. According to Bloomberg, the US wants to secure a full ceasefire during these weeks. And the discussions on Thursday, which including a meeting between French President Macron and US envoy Steve Witkoff, were attended by Ukrainian officials, focused on how to move to a ceasefire and lasting peace as soon as possible. The participants also told US officials that they fully support Trump's objective to end the war. US officials indicated they expected to make significant progress soon, and participants also agreed to work towards that. Also, national security advisors and negotiators from Germany, France, US and Ukraine will gather again in London this week to follow up on their discussions in the French capital. The Paris meeting marked the last attempt by Europe to influence the outcome of talks by demonstrating that together with Ukraine they are fully supportive of US efforts to end the war and to ensure the just peace for Ukraine. Meanwhile, Royal Air Force fighters have been scrambled twice in less than 84 hours to protect NATO airspace from Russian aircraft, the Telegraph reports. British Typhoon fighter jets have been scrambled twice this week after Russian aircraft flew too close to NATO borders, raising concerns. The interceptions will be used by the British government as a further evidence of growing Russian threat to persuade the US not to scale back its military presence in Europe. Two Typhoon fighter jets based at the Malbork Air Base in Poland were scrambled to intercept Russian reconnaissance aircraft over the Baltic Sea. Less than 84 hours later, another pair of aircraft were scrambled to intercept an unidentified aircraft that had taken off from Kaliningrad region between Poland and Lithuania. The UK's Deputy Defence Secretary Luke Pollard told the Telegraph that the UK was unwavering on its commitments to NATO. The aircraft, part of a fleet of 6, were deployed to Poland 3 weeks ago as a part of a joint defense operation with the Swedish Air Force. That's all for today. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and glory to Ukraine!